Welcome back to the book club. Today's video is going to be a book discussion on Memories of Ice, the third book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Stephen Erickson. If you haven't read this book already, please just be aware that this video is going to be extremely filled with spoilers. I'm going to start off talking about the prologue and how that relates to things that happen in the rest of the book. So if you haven't already read the book, I do have a spoiler-free book review if you just want to know a little bit more about it, or if you're just okay with hearing all the spoilers about the book, that's perfectly fine. Listen on. And with that being said, let's just dive right into it. The way that I want to approach this video, I've been sort of playing with how exactly I do these like book discussion deep dives. The prologue in this book really stuck out to me. It's the best prologue, in my opinion, so far in the series. I know I'm only 3 books in, so maybe my opinion will change, but I think the prologue really, it connected with the different parts in the book in many different ways. It also like just laid out a bunch of mysteries for us to sort of uncover, and also left some mysteries that are still going to be unsolved. Like, for example, with the whole crippled god, we sort of know more about it now, but there's still a lot more to be discovered there, I think. So I wanted to start this video by, I have a few pages pulled up on my screen here from the wiki, and I want to go through like what happens in the prologue and then talk a little bit about how that connects with the rest of the book, because in this book the prologue really connects with all the different parts of this book, from the Panny and Seer to, you know, what's going on with Animander Rake and all that good stuff, like the elder gods like Cruel and his brother and sister, and I'm just going to dive right in. So the prologue starts off talking about a Jagged running away with 2 children, and we see the bonecaster Kalava, who is we know as Onos Tuolan, or Tool's sister, who sort of refused to be a part of the ritual of Talan. She doesn't become in like I don't know if it's like an undead or a forever living Talani Moss, but she stays as like a flesh and blood bonecaster because she avoids that that ritual. But we see her actually go and save this Jagged woman with her 2 children, and brings them to a rent in Morn, where she believes there's a warren of the Omtos Falak, the Jagged warren. And she says, hey, you know, yeet your kids in here, they'll be safe. And then like you'll be good. Your children will be saved. Like, you don't have to worry about running away from the Talani Moss. And so that happens. The children hop in, and then we see Prawn Chol, who is sort of returning from, I don't remember if he was in Deadhouse Gates. Actually, I don't really think he came up, but he was in Gardens of the Moon. We saw him during that ritual with Tattersail and Night Chill and all of them. So Prawn Chol shows up, and he sort of tells her, or he finds out what happens, and he reaches Morn too late. He knows that she sent like her, by her I mean what's her name, Kalava. By Kalava sending these children into the rent, it actually sealed it and relegated them to a eternity of pain. You know, of course, Kalava doesn't know that. She thought that she was helping them, but actually what she was doing was like sealing this chaotic warren and forever trapping the children in this like forever pain. That's when we find out that Kalava also is planning on avoiding the ritual, because Prawn says, hey, I'm going to this ritual. Like, are you going to show up to the party or no? And she says, nah. And, you know, we sort of learn that information. But this plays a very important role in basically the entire story, because what we learn at the very end of the book, sort of like the mirror of this prologue, is that one of these 2 children is the Panny and Seer. The Panny and Seer is a Jagged, or is, you know, a Jagged who's taking over somebody's body. I'm not exactly sure how that precisely worked, but the Panny and Seer was one of these children who was basically tossed into this warren of chaos and sealed it. And they just had a, you know, hundreds of thousands of years of pain and torture, and then got released at some point, and then became, you know, they basically wanted to seek revenge for what happened, and started being the Panny and Seer, and, you know, creating this army and raising the troops and doing all the crazy messed up things that the Panny and Seer did. So it's a really interesting reflection. Like the entire time reading this book, I was thinking about what was going on with the rent and mourn. We also start off with lady, what's her name, Draconis's daughter, who starts off at the rent and mourn. So like this thing is very prevalent throughout the book. I kept thinking, maybe I'm a little ashamed to admit, but I actually didn't really make the connection until it was straight up revealed that one of these children may be the Panian seer. I just like kind of forgot slash didn't really think about how that would be related to the book. So I was kind of surprised in like a pleasant surprise way, like, oh, that's really cool. Of course that makes sense in hindsight, but I just like totally missed it. But I think it was really interesting the way that like this part of the prologue was reflected throughout the rest of the book, and also gave us some more knowledge about the Talani Mas and the first ritual, which we've heard about a lot, but we didn't really know what the ritual was. And we still don't, at the prologue, but throughout the book, we do learn. The next half of the prologue, or the next, section of the prologue, happens 100,000 years before Burn's sleep. That first part was 300,000 years. So this is now 200,000 years later. And this is 3 years after the fall of the crippled god. And this is not the first time the crippled god has been mentioned, but we actually learn a little bit more about what or who the crippled god is. We learn that the crippled god was basically like summoned to this planet by people who wanted to destroy Calor, who was like this evil ruler guy. And apparently the crippled god just like flew out of space like an asteroid and landed on the planet and was crippled. And because he was so crippled, he basically like went crazy while trying to piece himself back together. He was driven insane by the shattering of his body. And so, this of course relates to the rest of the book as well, because we learn that the crippled god is like one of the major threats in the book, and also like is not dealt with in the book. We learn that the crippled god is basically building up an army and like is trying to become part of the house of cards, or the deck of dragons, whatever it is. Paran is talking about, once we find out that he's the master of the deck, he's talking about like, do I acknowledge the house of the crippled god or do I deny them from the deck? Which makes more sense. And I believe that he ultimately ends up deciding that he should allow them to become a house, because then at least the house of the crippled god is bound by some of the rules of what these other houses abide by, whatever those may be, rather than just being this chaotic external force. But we learn how the crippled god got to the state he is, and we sort of learn why he's evil. He's just been like shattered and has been slowly piecing himself together for 300,000 years. And we learn that he's the source of Burn's sleep, because he is slowly poisoning Burn. We learn again, probably halfway through this book, we learn a little bit about Kaladin Brood's hammer. His hammer was a gift from Burn when she went to sleep, and he would use it to, he could use her power in some way. So basically Burn chose to go to sleep in order to slow the poison. This happened at year 0, according to the calendar that we've been following. And so the current events of the book are taking place in year, I think, 1163 or 1164 after Burn sleep. So that means that Kaladin Brood's been around for at least 1200-ish years with this hammer from Burn that he can use. And there's a little bit more about the hammer, but I'll, maybe jump back to that later. Anyways, continuing on with the prologue. So the crippled god falls. The goal was to take down Calor, but it didn't really work because the crippled god got crippled. And so 3 years later, we're here and we see Karul again, or Cruel, whatever, however you want to pronounce his name. One of the elder gods that was also part of this ritual with Pranchol in Gardens of the Moon. We know him as an elder god. And we meet his brother, Draconis, and his sister, who is unnamed but is called the Sister of the Cold Knights, which is, a very intentional name, which I'll jump back to in a second. They've come to kill Calor, who's been ruling as a tyrant. And when they show up to take care of him, they find out that he basically just destroyed his own civilization so that the elder gods couldn't take it from him or couldn't liberate them. So instead of like, it's sort of like a like I'm not fired, I quit situation. He's like, you can't come and, liberate my people. I'm just going to destroy them all. There's nothing left to liberate. And so that's kind of he pulled this like crazy card, and they were like, all right, well, we've got to punish you now. Sorry, man. Um, so what they do is they curse Calor with eternal life, and so he can never ascend, and he just has to basically suffer from what would happen if you lived for hundreds of thousands of years, which is that like you just become old, you keep gaining and losing friends, whatever else. Instead of being able to have the sweet release of death at the end of your life, you just sort of live forever. And that's sort of the curse that we left him with. I think Calor is mentioned in Gardens of the Moon, but I didn't really remember who he was. He's sort of like Kaladin Brood's second in command guy. Like, but we learn a lot more about him in this book. So I actually forgot who Calor was. I like didn't recognize the name. But then once we get into the book and we learn about what the situation is with Animander and Kaladin Brood and their army, we get to see Calor, and like because of this prologue, we know that he's actually hundreds of thousands of years old, or at least 120,000 years old, which is long enough, and that he's done some bad things in his past, and he's probably not. It's unclear exactly why they have an alliance, but it's clear that what Kaladin Brood gets out of it is that Calor has a lot of experience being a warlord because he's been around for a really, really, really long time. So, perhaps that's the reason why they were keeping him around. Of course, we later learn that Calor turns on them and joins the crippled god, which is, a little bit ironic because the crippled god was, of course, called to the planet to destroy Calor initially. I don't know if it's clear that the crippled god would have known that or not. It was more the people summoning the crippled god wanted him to kill Calor. But now the crippled god, in the middle of the book, shows up and is like, hey, or has a messenger show up and say, hey, do you want to join my new house? I'm forming a new guild. Like you can be in it if you want. And Calor agrees, and then sort of leads to what happens towards the end, which I'll loop back to as well. Now, it wasn't just Calor that gets cursed at the end. We also learn that Calor curses each of the elder gods. It's unclear to me, how curses work. I don't know how magical Calor is. I can understand an elder god being able to curse somebody else, but it was a little weird to me that Calor had the ability to curse the elder gods by just saying, I curse you. Maybe he's like more magical than I know, or maybe he has some like he's more than just a regular human. But because they cursed him to never be able to ascend and stuff, I'm not really sure how he managed to curse them, but he did, and we do know that the curses kind of worked. So there's 3 curses that Calor bestowed. He cursed Cruel to fade from the world and be forgotten. He cursed Draconis to have his creation turned upon him, and the sister of the cold nights to have her body torn apart upon a field of battle and still know no respite. So we know basically Carul's curse is that people would kind of just forget about him and he would stop having power, which is like kind of already happened. People talk about in Darujistan, there's like some buildings that were built in honor of Cruel, and they were abandoned. Like people didn't actually use them anymore because people didn't really believe in Cruel anymore, didn't really think about him. It was really only Croup who met up with Cruel in Gardens of the Moon and sort of like talked with him, but most people, it seemed like, didn't have any faith in him. There's no like churches to worship him or anything. So that curse kind of came true. We know that in this prologue we learned that Draconis was the one who created the sword Dragnipur. I'm not sure if it was mentioned by name in the prologue, but it was like pretty clear that he was talking about the sword. He was saying that like his sword was still he wasn't quite finished with it yet, but he was almost finished with it. And so his creation being turned upon him, we learn later in the book. I think, if you're an astute reader, you may have guessed this earlier than I did, but I only learned when I was told this. But we learned that Draconis is actually now within the sword Dragnipur. We sort of learned that Draconis's daughter was partying with Animander Rake, or in a party with, in like the video game sense. They were adventuring together. along with, I believe, Kaladin Brood at some point in the past. And, Draconis' daughter gave Animander Rake the sword Dragnipur for whatever reason. And it's uncovered that Animander Rake then used the sword on Draconis himself, therefore fulfilling Calor's curse. Draconis is now within the sword, and we have a scene during this book where Paran goes back into the sword, through his magic use of the deck, where he can sort of just like teleport now. He like goes back into the sword and talks with Draconis a little bit and learns a little bit more about what's going on within the sword and like what needs to happen from then on. So that's another curse that was successful. And then the third one was the sister of the Torn Knights to have her body torn apart upon a field of battle and still know no respite. Again, this is like a thing where an astute reader or somebody rereading would immediately know what this means. I didn't make this connection until Calor starts thinking like, Nightchill, where have I heard this name before? And then like the next chapter, Calor again says like, Nightchill, wait, that's a little on the nose, isn't it? So it becomes very apparent within the first like quarter of the book that Nightchill is the sister of the Cold Knight. She's an elder god. She's like the sister of Draconis and Cruel. And I think it's mentioned in this prologue as well that she prefers to like walk around with the humans. And also it's mentioned in this book that Nightchill has shown up in the history books a few times. So it's clear that maybe this isn't the only name that she uses, but she tends to use the name Nightchill. And being named the sister of the Cold Knights, it's sort of a very on the nose name. So again, going back to this curse or prophecy here, the sister of the Cold Knights to have her body torn apart upon a field of battle and still no respite. We know this to be the event where Tattersail and Belladin and Nightchill sort of like exploded in Gardens of the Moon and like disappeared. And at the end of Gardens, my thought was that Tattersail was like this soul that survived and was put into this Rivi woman. Like as of, this Rivi woman that was the vessel for this like ritual. But, it's made immediately clear in this book that it's not just Tattersail's soul in there within Silver Fox. It's actually Nightchill as well, and Belladin, who is Nightchill's lover, and was like the one who's trying to save her. So that is Nightchill's body being torn apart, and she still knows no respite. She's now like trapped in this body with these other souls, and it's like unclear how Silver Fox is separate from the souls that are within her, or like how her personality will exactly develop. But Calor with curses is 3 for 3 just based on this prologue. And this sort of, I think what made this prologue so interesting is it was very cool to read this stuff up top, but also a lot of the events that I just described happen throughout the entire book. So there's constantly like, I must have gone through and reread parts of the prologue, 5 or 10 times while going through this book, because it just is so interconnected with the plot in a way that the previous prologues weren't really. The previous prologues for Deadhouse Gates and Guards of the Moon were just prologues, which is totally fine. That's, a prologue doesn't have to like plant mysteries for the rest of the book, but this one did. So, it was a very interesting thing to keep going back to. The last part of the prologue that I didn't really cover yet was also the ancient beast god watching from afar. So we sort of know that, towards the end, there's, I'm now forgetting the names of like the two beasts that are like mates that sort of come about towards the end of the book. But we see this beast at the very beginning. I'm going to see if this wiki links. Oh, right. So Tog was one of the wolves, which is what sort of Tok embodies towards the end of this book. Tok the Younger, like getting transferred into whatever the mother of the, or the son of the women of the Dead Seed. He has this like rebirth arc, which I could get into, but I don't remember all of the details off the top of my head. So I'm mostly going to like yada yada that part. But I think Tok's arc was very interesting there. But there's also this whole like wolf thing that was happening where for most of the book, Talk disappears because he sort of joins the crazy peasants of the Panian Seer and goes off to try to join up with the Malazan army. But then he catches the attention of the lead guy of this army, um, and then eventually gets sold to the Panian Seer and then gets beat up. But we know that like this other wolf that's with him was like chasing him down. So there was connections for this wolf part throughout the entire book as well. So the next thing that I wanted to mention that was like the prologue and how it connected to all the rest of the book. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Burn's sleep. This was something that we kept hearing about throughout the previous books because it was the way that they date the years. It's unclear if like the characters know about this dating system or if it's just like what's used for the books themselves. But I thought it was interesting to learn a little bit more about what Burn's sleep is and like how that connects with the world. So like we learned that the calendar is tied to the year that Burn went to sleep on purpose to sort of help prevent the crippled god. So what she did was she tried to forge her power into the hammer that would be used against her tormentor, and the hammer was given to Kaladin Brood. So I think that there's got to be more that happens with Burn in some ways, like because we know that towards the end of the book they took the Panian Seer down into like this, I don't know, I imagine it as like an underground area. I'm not sure if it was actually underground or if it's just like in a warren somewhere, but they basically like brought the Panian Seer back into an Omtos Falak warren in like this area where like Burn was residing and where like the poison was first sensed by I'm not forgetting the name of the mage that works with the bridge burners, but the mage of the bridge burners, like he sort of got that in the beginning of the book, and they were able to basically like, I don't know, the Omtos Falak Warren is an icy cold warren. The memories of ice is a theme throughout this entire book. Things being of ice is sort of like this whole like jagged theme, and they're able to slow the poison down towards the end of this book, which is presumably buying time for the rest of the books, the events in the rest of the book to happen. So I want to talk a little bit more now about the sword, Dragnipur, which I think is probably one of like the coolest parts of this book, in my opinion. I like cool swords that are magical in various ways, and this definitely fits the bill there. So we learn the sword's been forged by Draconis, who was later killed by Animander Rake. So Draconis exists within the sword. Paran enters the warren of the sword, and Draconis tells him about the origin and the purpose of it, and explained the need to shatter the sword. So he said that when he originally had made the sword, his understanding of the Gate of Darkness had been flawed. So Draconis tells Paran that before the houses there were holds, and before the holds there was wandering. Not wandering, but a migration, a seasonal round, predictable, cyclical. What seemed aimless and random was in truth fixed, bound to its own laws. Dragnipur has bound the Gate of Darkness to flight for eternity. So it became clear that the reason that Draconis originally made this sword to sort of trap this Gate of Darkness was incorrect, and really what needed to happen was what needs to happen in the future is that this Gate of Darkness needs to be allowed to migrate again, or at least that's sort of what I'm interpreting from this. What's happening is that the souls that are trapped within Dragnipur become too exhausted to pull this wagon, and they keep getting stacked back up onto the wagon, and there's this demand for new souls to come and pull the load from their flight from chaos. So there's two options. One of them is that the sword keeps being used so that new souls can keep being added to it, so that this wagon can be pulled even more and like sort of keep up with all the bodies that need to be piled on the back. It's getting heavier and heavier and heavier. Or the sword needs to be shattered and the gate of darkness needs to be allowed to naturally migrate like it has been prior. So that's it for all the random wiki pages that I'd pulled up to try to talk through like the various high level things that are going on within this book. There's a few specific notes that I wrote down that I want to go over as well. So one of them is the way that Steven Erikson sort of reveals things throughout the series so far has been something that I think about a lot and something that is interesting to me. And what I've observed, at least so far, is that it seems like secrets or mysteries within the series tend to be revealed in three different ways, or three different parts, I should say. So the first way that things are revealed is that there's extremely subtle hints where people that are rereading the book or are reading extremely closely and like, picking over things with a fine-tooth comb would be able to tell what's going on and can like understand the secret. One of those, an example of this is that we meet a character named Karuli in this book. And I think that if you're rereading the book, it's obviously, who this is. But also, if you just say the name out loud, it is kind of obvious that Karuli and Karul are almost the same name. Karuli is sort of just Karul spelled differently and with an I at the end. So when it was revealed that Karuli was Cruel himself, I was surprised because I'm just a dummy. But I think that like that's sort of the first level of ways that secrets get established in this book. This is also like the same way that in Gardens of the Moon, it's clear who Cotillion is. And the other guy, I forget his name now, but like the king of the High House Shadow, like the previous emperor, Kellenvad, and Dancer. So like you could guess who they were in like the first page of the book if you like in like one of the first epitaphs, if you actually like read it really carefully or knew what you were looking for. But it's just a very subtle hint that like doesn't really sell it off completely, but leads you towards the answer. The second is then he'll drop some slightly more overt hints that aren't quite telling you the answer, but are getting you to think about it. So my example for this is at some point in Memories of Ice, Kellor was talking about Nightchill's name, and he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say like, "Oh, Nightchill is the sister of the Cold Night. Nightchill is, Draconis and Cruel's sister. She's an elder god." But what he does say is, "Oh, Nightchill, that's a little on the nose, isn't it?" Like he basically says, "Oh, that's like not very creative of a name there." And so again, if you're just not really digging deep or not really paying that close attention, you might just kind of think this is a weird offhand comment. But if you were paying a lot of attention to the prologue, you might connect the dots here and understand that Nightchill is this elder god's soul that's now trapped within Silver Fox. And then the last, way that things are revealed is eventually at some point, Steven Erikson will straight up tell you the answer. So a bit further on in the book, it is made extremely clear to everybody that Nightchill is an elder god, and like her soul is now trapped within Silver Fox in some way. So a lot of the like secrets that have been revealed throughout this book so far fall into these categories. I'm sure that there's probably tons of secrets where maybe they're still in the very subtle phase or just the slightly subtle phase that I still haven't quite picked up on. And like maybe once I understand the secret or go back and reread, it'll be easier to understand. But I think that's really interesting. Now when I like read things, I'm sort of thinking about these mysteries in this framework. I'm thinking, okay, well, this is sort of a level 2 secret now. It's a little bit more overt versus a level 1 secret where I'm like, I know that there's something here, but I don't know what it means. Like this is very clearly a prophecy, but I have I don't have the tools to understand what the prophecy means at this moment. And then there's times where the author just tells you what's going on and you're like, okay, well, clearly I must have missed some hints beforehand, but now I know what's happening. So for example, like at the very end of the book, when we learn who the Panian Seer is, I'm like, oh yeah, right. That makes total sense. Like I probably could have guessed that. I missed all the level 1 and level 2 hints throughout. And I just had to wait until level 3 came about. And I got like, the cheat codes. So I think that's kind of interesting, and that's like something that I'm keeping in mind now while reading these books in the future. Um, and otherwise, I have some scattered notes of things that I wanted to talk about. One of them was I did have a lot of problems in Gardens of the Moon with Paran and Tattersail because I thought the relationship just didn't make any sense, or the feelings I should say didn't make much sense because there wasn't much of a relationship there. That actually caused me to realize that Paran was very young. Um, I kind of forgot how young he was up until I was thinking about it after reading Gardens of the Moon, and I was like, it's crazy how infatuated he is with Tattersail when they spent like 2 weeks together and they had one sort of fade to black, hookup scene. Maybe they hooked up more than that, but still, like they were together for a couple weeks and then Tattersail died. So like, why is Paran so obsessed with her? And in this book, part of in the first half, that's something that Paran actually struggles with because he sees Silver Fox. He's like, first of all, this is really weird because it's a child. And second of all, like it's weird because it's Tattersail, but only part of Tattersail. And also she's like growing old fast. So it's kind of, there's a lot to do with her being a kid and it being weird, which I think is good because if Paran was like attracted to her mind or something, I would have been getting some pedo vibes and I would have been kind of thrown off. But I'm glad that Paran was like, this is weird. She's a child, like blah, blah, blah. But at some point in the book, he actually think like he's just having a conversation with himself, and he actually realizes that his infatuation with Tattersail didn't make much sense. And he admits that he sort of became obsessed when she died. Um, I think that in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. He's a young guy. I don't think he has much experience with relationships, and he sort of got obsessed with her, and especially because she was dead, he got even more obsessed. And she did kind of reach out to him towards the end of Gardens of the Moon and say like, hey, what's up, I'm still alive. And he was happy about that, and it ultimately led to them linking up again. But he realized that like Tattersail was only part of who Silver Fox is. It's unclear exactly like which soul dominates Silver Fox, but it's clearly not all Tattersail, even if she looks like Tattersail. But either way, I'm happy that Paran realized like I was just kind of being obsessed. I was being a weirdo, and he sort of just stops. From that point on, he doesn't really think about her anymore. He's not like following her around or trying to like communicate with her in any way from that point forward. The last thing that I want to talk about, or maybe the last thing, we'll see if I drift off into space and think of something else. But the last thing I'd written down at least was that was the bridge burners. So I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention like the ending of the book and how I felt about that. I think the last two chapters were extremely awesome. The last chapter, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was like 100 pages long. So I knew that I was in for the long haul when I was reading it on my Kindle and I saw like 2.5 hours left in the chapter. But so much happened in those last two chapters where like the entire that was sort of the entire conclusion to the book, all like in this crazy scene where a bunch of we kept shifting perspectives over and over again and understanding like all the events that have happened and piecing them all together. I thought what I really liked about it was there's this bridge burner theme that we learn about. I'm not sure if it's mentioned in Gardens of the Moon. It might have been, but I sort of missed it. But in this book, they talk about how the bridge burners are last in, first out, which I thought was, a very, very cool thing. They're sort of the last in, first out for Kapistan, I believe, is where the first siege takes place in this book, and then also in this final city. I don't remember the name of where the final battle with the Pandian Seer happens, but they're also this like last in, first out force there as well, which is very badass, very cool. And unfortunately, a lot of them die because of this, because it's just like absolute chaos. The other thing that happens during this is that Whiskey Jack is killed. I'm not sure if this is going to be a book where like people come back from the dead. I know like Tattersail sort of came back in a way, but I'm at least guessing right now that Whiskey Jack is just kind of dead forever, which was honestly very sad. I should have seen it coming, but I still was surprised when it happened because we knew that Calor like took this deal to be part of Team Crippled God, and he had the conversation with Kaladin Brood saying, hey, I'm gonna go catch up with the bridge burners. Like, I'm gonna go see what's up with them. And Kaladin was like, sure, go for it. And then he does show up, and like, of course, what he does is he attacks Silver Fox and tries to get rid of her. Obviously. So, and then Whiskey Jack dies defending her. But also, there's the whole issue of, Whiskey Jack died sort of because he had this knee that he never got healed fully. And it's a question that a lot of people are asking in the book, which is like, why did he like? Or they're not asking necessarily, but they're thinking to themselves like, oh, why didn't he ever get it healed? Like, he always kept saying that there's not time and he'll do it later and blah blah blah. It seems like healing doesn't take that long, so you know, I've been thinking about why he maybe didn't want to get his knee healed, and I don't have a great answer, but like my guess at this moment at least is that in some ways Whiskey Jack maybe wanted to die on the battlefield. And one way to sort of guarantee that that happens the next time he gets into a big confrontation is by not having a working knee. It's possible that he was talking about his future life, ditching the Malazan campaign in the future. Which would have been great for him. And he met Corlat, and they sort of like had their relationship throughout this book. But the fact that he never got his knee healed, and like he was willing to throw himself into battle against Calor, and it said that he's a very good soldier, and he probably could have taken him if it wasn't for his knee, leads me to believe that like he kind of set himself up to fail. Like he maybe wanted to go out with a bang, or just like had that thought in the back of his mind, had maybe a little bit of like, suicidal tendency or something in his mind, where he was like, you know what, if we get into battle and I need to join the battle as well, then maybe I just die on the battlefield, and that's like where my story ends. So, I guess I'm curious what other people think too, if there's alternate reasons for why Whiskey Jack just like didn't get his leg healed when it seemed like an easy thing to do and everyone was suggesting that he did it. That's sort of my opinion. Also, while I was talking about this, I just realized that, and I was talking about the last battle, I somehow went, I've been going for almost 40 minutes now, and I didn't once mention the Kachane Chamal or whatever they're called, the like fucking dinosaurs with swords, which was kind of a huge part of this book because they're this like ancient enemy that's come back from the dead. I mean, that's like one of the coolest random enemies to show up. Like, I guess it's weird because this book, like, I don't think about how there's so many different races of like, there's non-traditional fantasy races all over the place. There's like giants and people that are, wear bug armor for whatever reason, and like these like weird clans that are like non-human. And there's the Teist Andy and the Teist Eater and the blah blah blah. There's all this different stuff. And I never thought like a civilization of, like dinosaurs with specializations, were a thing, but like they were in this world. There's like the Kel hunters, I believe, which were like the Kachane Chamal or whatever, that had swords for arms. I don't exactly know how that works, but like it's pretty badass. It's pretty cool. I'm hoping that there's more of these like interesting races that show up throughout this book, or throughout the series. There's the Segula as well from the island, south of Genebakis, where they have these like crazy sword fighters who are able to just like, beat the best of the best in sword battles, and Animander Rake was only number 7 among them. So I'm curious if they come up again. I'm curious what other kind of like random fantasy races or like groups of people we discover going forwards. But it seems like so far every book has added like new crazy fantasy elements. So I'm very interested in seeing where that goes going forward. So I think just based on how long I've been rambling, I'm going to wrap this up here. There's probably a billion things I didn't cover. I'm going to immediately, as soon as I stop recording, think about them and then regret that I didn't mention them at all. But hopefully, this was interesting in some way. If you watched to the end of the video, let me know in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button. If there's anything that, I didn't talk about, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll, chime in with what my opinion was. If there's anything that I missed or Misspoke about, feel free to correct me, let me know. It has been a little over a week since I finished reading this book. I wrapped it up last weekend, which was like right after my sister's wedding. So, and then I had a week of work. So it's been kind of a while. I've been thinking about it, but I keep forgetting and remembering different details. So I tried to, frame this conversation around the prologue and how it attaches to the rest of the thing with my random thoughts at the end. But let me know if there's anything big that I missed that I should have talked about. And let me know what you'd like to see in the next, Malazan recap I do once I finish book 4. See you next time.